Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a poll suggesting that a clear majority of people in the UK are in favour of not only the new Tier 4 restrictions laid out by Boris Johnson, although that of course just applies to England, but also the tighter controls over Christmas festivities, which again are devolved but also being scaled back across the UK. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. Stats time again. Delve into a bit of stats. Not done this for a while. So this is a poll from YouGov. As those who've sort of followed some of these in the past, as I've said before, this is a polling company that not only shows its methodology very clearly and is robust, but also proves itself every election. Not all polling companies do this. In fact, the vast majority do not. Now, unless they are carrying out what is clearly a commission for a paying customer that wants a particular set of results, we can treat these as reliable. When they do these sorts of polls, they're not doing them for any paying customers. This is their shop window to show how effective they are. Now, I'm going to look at the view of the new Tier 4 restrictions first. There were a few questions asked. Tier 4 restrictions, and it's because if you look at them at first, you might go, oh, that's a bit of a surprise. I looked at them and thought, oh, that's surprising. But when you consider it a bit more carefully, actually, it's not necessarily that surprising. So for those who don't know, the new Tier 4 restrictions are basically like another lockdown for people in parts of the south and the east of England, including London, where the new highly transmittable variant of the COVID virus is currently running rampant. Now, unfortunately, the government have tried to say that this new Tier 4 restriction is as a result of the fear of this new variant. In reality, it's just because their previous cack-handed attempts to control the virus have just failed. But there we go, it is what it is. Now, according to the poll, 75% of all Britain support it, with just 17% opposing it. There's always a certain number that aren't really sure, which is fair enough. If you're not reading enough into it, you don't have an opinion, at least be brave enough to say you don't have an opinion. Now, what may seem surprising is that when you break it down, a large proportion of Conservative voters, people who are more likely to be anti-restrictions of any kind, support it. And I know that some people look at it and go, I'm not sure I really believe that. You know, in fact, proportionally more Conservative voters than Labour voters support it. But actually, it does make sense. It looks surprising. But think in terms of a few contexts here. So this is a poll representing everyone. You know, all Britons want this pandemic to go away, and the majority know that in order for this to happen, something actively needs to be done. It won't just disappear one day like a miracle, like the outgoing Orange one said. So support for measures that will help stamp out the virus will, of course, be largely supported. It should be remembered that not everyone in the UK is affected by Tier 4. So when you look at these figures, and you realise that most of the respondents who are responding to the poll, because, you know, it's taken across the whole country, most of them are not actually impacted directly by Tier 4 restrictions anyway. You know, there's about 18 million people of a UK population of about 66 million, or an England population of about 55, 56 million, that are affected by the Tier 4 restrictions. So the majority are not. And then just from that point of view, it suddenly makes more sense. There is something else in a bit that makes more sense as well. So we're not saying, of course, that, oh yeah, of course, it's obviously that everyone outside of Tier 4 is in favour of it and those inside Tier 4 are opposed. But you would imagine that the bulk of opposition will come from inside those affected areas because it affects them. Like, it's easy for me, I'm in a Tier 3 area and it remains a Tier 3 area. It's easy for me to say, oh, of course, I agree with the Tier 4 restrictions, you know, when I don't have to suffer from them, if you want to use that word. Whereas, you know, someone in a Tier 4 area might go, I'm not really sure about this because I don't like it. It's going to impact my life. And I imagine that almost everyone is happy to support effective measures if they believe that the measures are effective, if they don't personally have to suffer any privations as a result. Then you dig a little deeper, and the breakdown by region, that was interesting. The strongest opposition to the measures came from London. Now, this is affected by Tier 4, but opposition to it is significantly higher than in, say, the rest of the south of England. Could be explained by the fact that not all of the south of England is Tier 4, but all of London is. But what struck me was that proportionally there was more opposition to Tier 4 in the north of England than in the south of England. If you take London out of it and you consider the south of England without London, opposition slightly greater in the north. And you thought, well, that's a bit interesting. Could it be that there's a lot of people in the north fear that Tier 4 is coming? Now, I will point out the majority of people in the north were still in favour of this restriction, but where the opposition existed, is it that they think, well, we're going to end up in Tier 4? You know, I mean, let's face facts. Johnson's tier system, this is now the third version of it, arguably. Admittedly, this is like part 2A. You know, he's added an extension to it rather than change the previous three. But it's a new system, and all the previous systems have just been a one-way street. You know, you go from Tier 1 to Tier 2 to from Tier 2 to Tier 3. There's no going back down it. You don't slide back, it's only up. And we also know that this tier system is going to be in place for months. Government are now saying that this system is going to be in place until we've had, you know, real good rollout of the vaccine. Now, the north of England, with almost no exceptions, there are a few, but with almost no exceptions, is basically in Tier 3. It might be viewed that it's only a matter of time before Tier 4 comes knocking on their door. And it may also be that because the government have consistently shafted the north with their measures, mostly by failing to provide adequate levels of financial support for businesses and workers, as compared to the south, that there's a core who fundamentally, I don't blame them, do not trust the government on any system now. You know, and a lot of people aren't going to read about what medical and scientific experts will say about it. They'll just look at it. Oh, this government who've cocked everything up say we need to do this thing. Well, do you know what? They'll probably cock that up as well. Because it's not exactly worked for them so far. And then there was another little indicator which again can partially explain this. The strongest support by age group comes from the older. Clearly younger people fear less mortal danger from contracting COVID. It's a bit careless because there's several issues. First of all, you can be perfectly fit and healthy, no underlying conditions, and still succumb to COVID. A number of people have done this. Obviously, people who have underlying health conditions, people who are older, are much more likely. The numbers back that up. But you can have that sort of feeling of immortality when you're young. But then, of course, there's the other thing is potentially long COVID and you know, having long-term health problems as a result. So people, I think, should be a little bit more, not fearful, that's the wrong word, but cautious. They shouldn't really feel that, oh, if I get COVID, I'll be fine, like flu. No. We don't know that. But obviously, clearly younger people feel less threatened by it. So opposition is stronger amongst those groups. And it basically is a sliding scale. So then you get the oldest group, the over 65s, and they are overwhelmingly supportive of these measures. And you think, and then I think to myself, a little thought experiment. I wonder what would happen if this group, because the elderly are going to be the first to be vaccinated. It's still going to take some time. So is it going to flip at a point where the elderly have largely been vaccinated? Will it? But the restrictions are still in place because there's not enough vaccinations going out. Will it flip the other way? That'll be an interesting thing to pay attention to. But then that's another explainer about why there's such support amongst Conservative voters. Conservative voters, large block of them are the elderly. So the very people who are most threatened by COVID and will, for fear of their own health and safety, support any measures designed to suppress the rate of infection, also happen to be Conservative voters. So I think that's what may explain the greater support for these measures amongst Conservative voters. But then we come to the results about Christmas, because that was the second big announcement, scaling back the Christmas plans. Now that affects people in Tier 2 more severely, of course. But it does affect everyone. It's been scaled back everywhere. And people were going to be allowed 5 full days to kill their granny. Now it's only going to be 1 day. And here there is also majority support across the regions and across the political spectrum. But the support is definitely lower than for Tier 4. There are fewer people in favour of the scaling back of Christmas plans than there are for Tier 4. Now, that is suggestive that, again, more people are likely to support measures if it doesn't impact them, because the Christmas plans impact everyone. And, you know, it's like, after all, if you support Tier 4 to help suppress the infection rate, why would you not also support the scaling back of household mixing around a dinner table? But the results show that there is a section of people, not necessarily a massive number of people, but a significant number of people who support the Tier 4, the introduction of the Tier 4 restrictions, but not the greater level of caution over Christmas. Conclusion, some people will only support measures that spoil someone else's plans, not their own. The same age profile holds true as well. You got least support for the Christmas plans amongst the young, scales up the age ranges with a big jump at pensionable age. And on both questions, there isn't really much of a difference between social groups. That was interesting, but I suppose shouldn't be unexpected. COVID is the great leveller, isn't it? Although the poorest have been hit harder by the pandemic, they've not been hit harder directly by the virus. It's the result of the government's policies, both past and present, not the virus itself. Wealth is no protector against infection, and if you are infected, it's also no protector against the consequences. So support or opposition doesn't seem to have a lot to do with your social group. Finally, there was a third question. This has to be asked. This is an interesting one. So how do you think the government is doing? Because what we have here are two poll questions that are both asking about what people think about the government's plans. And both of them show a clear majority supporting the government's new measures about, Tier 4 as well as more caution for Christmas. However, on this issue, for the government, a clear majority are not impressed with the government's handling. The only groups where more people think the government are doing well than doing badly are, one, Conservative supporters, and it's not exactly overwhelming here. It's quite a small majority think the government are doing well, but Conservative voters. Secondly, the south of England, but not only are more of these people Conservative voters, so there's crossover there, but they've been better looked after. Can we remember that when the government were putting in tight restrictions on the north of England, they were not offering much in the way of financial support, and then as soon as they had to put the south of England into tighter restrictions as well, all of a sudden they released exactly the sort of financial support that the north of England leaders were calling for. They wouldn't give it when it was just them, but all of a sudden when it was going to hit people in the south of England, oh yeah, we can do that. So the south of England have been looked after better. And the third one, of course, is the oldest range. Now this is the most disappointing to me, because so far results make sense. This is the one that, of course, not a surprise, but it doesn't make sense. The very people whose lives have been threatened and even taken by this government's handling of the pandemic, whether due to greed or incompetence, make your own mind up, combination of the two as far as I'm concerned, it's the same group of people who are most likely to think the government are, at the very least, doing as well as anyone else could have. You see the same things. Oh, well, everyone's suffering. No one else would have done any better. Larry the Cat would have done better, love. The phrase turkeys voting for Christmas is getting some serious use in 2020. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. People are supporting the measures, it seems, which means compliance may be good enough to have a positive impact, which is encouraging. Although it's also clear, just from generally looking about, that there will be distressingly high levels of non-compliance as well. When I see and hear about people openly talking about ignoring restrictions on social media, and I don't just mean Daily Telegraph gobshites, ordinary people, obviously not expecting their comments to be socially unacceptable, otherwise they wouldn't make them, or refer to the police, otherwise they wouldn't make them. But although a majority looks like it supports the measures, they also know that the government are handling this thing very badly, which also gives us some hope for the future. But those are my thoughts. As I say, let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.